Okay, our guest speaker today is going to talk about a difficult subject that we don't often want to talk about. We finally managed to get a credible article in the Sunday Herald last week, which was good to see that it's hit the airwaves. Just before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to maybe just get a perspective on why we really need to deal with this. Most of the people in the room here today are in the age group of 25 to 50. Now, the reality for men, if you're a male in New Zealand, you're most likely to die from cancer. That's our leading cause of death. The second two leading causes of death, which are roughly equal to each other, are car accidents and suicide. They vie for second place. But if you're in that age group between 25 and 50, you are most likely to die. More people die in that age group from, not from cancer, but from car accidents and suicide. That's your most likely cause of death. That's one of the reasons I've pursued the suicide issue for a number of years. It's finally starting to get some traction, and I'm very pleased that someone with the calibre of Viv Roberts has taken interest in the subject and has produced some realistic statistical medical data. I want to, I don't want to take that any further. I want to introduce Dr. Viv Roberts and let him give a realistic perspective on suicide in New Zealand.
Thanks very much, Billy. That's great. It's wonderful to be here. So yeah, this is who I am. I've been in general practice for something like 20 years and have now seen, I don't know, hundreds of people who are depressed. And Bevan's completely right with... Sorry. Talk to this one. Yeah, Bevan's completely right. Suicide is a major cause of death for young men. I get the Dominion every day. I'm in Hawke's Bay and get the Dominion, sorry. But suicides cost us an awful lot in this country. Here is some selected death rates. The yellow is 2002 figures. The dark blue is 2003, and they're the most recent ones I can get. And I think it's interesting that suicide is virtually the same as prostate cancer, and similar to breast cancer deaths, and much higher than cancer of the cervix. And you know, we put a lot of effort into breast cancer and cancer of the cervix, and I suppose you could say the death rate is lower because of that. But virtually, well, very little is actually done about suicides. This is from 2002, and this is who commits suicide. And you'll see the peak there is men 25 to 29. I don't know if you can read it properly, but the black figures are men, the grey ones are women. So interesting, biggest group 20 up to about 60. There's also this high group here of 85 plus, and that's the reason I first got asked to talk about suicide. And I think there's two factors in that. One factor is older guys, when they're told they're going to die of something terrible, don't wait around for that to happen. They decide to take themselves out first. The other thing that I think is a factor in that group is the problems that we're all here for don't go away. And as you get older, you think you have less time or less opportunity to deal with it. And by the time you get to 80, you think your chances of making a difference are pretty slight. This is suicide rates over the last 20 years or so, and men at the top, women at the bottom. you'll see the suicide rate climbing among men from the earliest part of the chart there, which is 1983. If you take the figures back further, the suicide rate was pretty stable, something like 2 men to 1 woman through the 70s. The family court started in 1980, and I personally believe that that was the cause of the rise. By the time we got to the mid-90s, the suicide rate was 4 times, 4 men to 1 woman. This is also from the 2003 figures, some interesting comparisons. If you look at deprived areas, I guess Otara is still deprived versus Remuera. That light blue at the top would be Otara, light blue at the top would be Remuera, the dark blue would be Otara. Here's the next one, the bright yellow is 25 to 44-year-old men, which is the highest group for men, and the blue below that is the highest group for women, which is 15 and 24, and then there's Maori women and Maori men, which is total figures. This is by area in the country, and you'll notice the lowest area in the country is actually Auckland, and the highest area is Hawke's Bay, where I come from. And in my mind, there's a very clear reason for that, and that is the nature of the main family court judge who's in Hawke's Bay.
Von Dadelson, that's the name.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. We have a moderate-sized prison in Hawke's Bay, Mangaroa, and it's my personal belief that this judge is responsible for more deaths than the entire population of Mangaroa prison.
What are the dates on those stats?
This is all 2003.
Because I used to research in suicide, and I know that the rural areas had a high suicide rate of men, and it was based on economic issues. It was long before the family court came into play. And so the rural areas had always, throughout New Zealand's history, had a higher suicide rate of men. And it is fundamentally to do with farming economies. And Muldoon era, there was a peak in it when he actually stopped subsidies for a period of time. There was a huge suicide rate of men consequence.
Yes, it's interesting. I personally believe that economic issues are not a major driver anymore. I think they probably were, but I regularly see men in all sorts of financial trouble, and it doesn't make them take themselves out, but take their kids away.
It's also the male responsibility goes on the focus of the father's responsibility to who he is and what he has to do.
So this is again the 2003 rates of who commits suicide. The yellow there is all women, the blue are all the men, and the light blue are men committing suicides for reasons other than relationship breakdown. And I actually think that's quite startling to look at it like that.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
I was just wondering where that came from, who did that work, where that came from.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's, I can show you that.
It's not so much who, is the reasons, is that information available through some government department?
Not directly. This, the total number, you can see my figures down on the left-hand side there. Total number is 515. Of that, the ratio of men to women is fairly easily to work out from the figures, so it's 139 women. And the total men is 338 plus 38, and the figure, the important figure in that is that men are 9 times more likely to complete suicide following relationship breakdown. And that's from Professor Beautray in Christchurch, who is the leading suicide researcher in New Zealand.
I was just wondering how they knew. Oh, I see. They're not saying necessarily that was the cause, they're just saying that.
Suicide following relationship breakdown. Yeah. Sorry.
That's new, Viv. You haven't got that on your DVD.
That's quite right. That's 2003 figures, which have just been released about 3 or 4 months ago. So this is a clip from the paper, and a mother in the States was given a hard time by a television interviewer about the death of her child, and this television interviewer suggested that the mother had caused the death of the child. She went out and shot herself. Men do very similar things. There we go. This is the figure from Professor Beautray. 9 times more likely to complete suicide following relationship breakdown, or I'm just trying to remember the exact word in her paper. It was something like relationship and legal difficulties.
What about the tax?
Well, that's part of it. Yes, so there's actually very little research into suicide, or at least very little meaningful research, I think. But I see lots of guys who are on the way. I find it usually takes guys 2 years to come to terms with the reality of what's happening to them. The first response is, there's something wrong here, there's a mistake. So what's life all about? This is a picture of my 2 kids when they were younger. And for the majority of men with kids, the reason they bother living and bother getting out of bed is to look after their kids. You take that away from them and you've taken away 95% of their reason for living. So the typical guy that I see coming through my door has suffered this sudden dislocation from his family. He's prevented from access. There's a temporary protection order against him. He attempts to seek help through appropriate means and gets none. It's completely normal for guys not to see their kids for at least months. When there is a hearing, the court's biased against him, and he gradually sinks into depression and despair. I've come to call this family court distress syndrome. There's all sorts of diagnoses that doctors use. Common ones are post-traumatic stress disorder or adjustment disorder. I think this syndrome is so common that it needs its own name.
Yes, good to hear the photos.
So, the mother goes on DPB. The guy gets stressed to the point where he can't work, as we just heard in our last speaker. IRD, take a reduction in earnings as a deliberate attempt to avoid child support and charge penalties, and they build up to the point where no one can cope with them. So here's a guy who has lost his wife, lost his kids, lost his home. He's got a new worst enemy who knows everything about him and all his financial details. He's trying to protect his kids from the flack that goes on in the family court. His new enemy is telling lies about him to the most important people in his life. He's fighting a well-honed legal machine. He's lost a large portion of his money, and he's got IRD on his back. This is stuff done by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's a palliative care specialist, and she talked about stages that we all go through following a loss. And if you just think about somebody dying on you for a minute, these things are all completely normal. The first response is that you go into a state of shock where you say, I just don't believe this has happened. You go numb. It's just like nothingness. And the classic example is somebody dies on you, you go to the funeral, and you're looking around and thinking, all their friends are here, why isn't this person here? And then suddenly you realise, oh yes, they are here, they're in the box. So that state usually lasts for a few days, up to a couple of weeks. Then you get into this high energy state and mixed emotion state where you think, well, if only I had done this, or if only this other person had left them alone, or if only the doctor had done the right thing, or whatever. And that's characterised by lots of emotions, often in different directions. So one minute you're crying, the next minute you're laughing for no obvious reason. And that state usually lasts weeks. You right, Jim?
Can I make an observation on this, if you don't mind?
Sure.
It says on my piece of paper that I got the other day that I've spoken to hundreds of people. I've actually probably spoken to 10,000 guys or more. What happens over here is that guys become more fundamental in their beliefs about themselves, about their kids, about the situation that they found themselves in, and they decide either to withdraw from the situation completely, or they decide to follow that fundamental set of beliefs and try to do something about the system that has targeted them and that they feel very unjustified, that they feel very unjustified, and so therefore they do something about it. And I believe this part over here is why we're here today, is because we've got to say, we've got to do something about it, and doing it singly, doing it maybe in little groups, but mainly doing it as a team, as a cohesive team together, so that we can actually do something to the system. That's what I'll be talking about this afternoon.
It describes our strength and our need to be strong.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Absolutely. Okay, so we've got this high emotion area, which lasts for a few weeks. Then you get into this really low patch where you feel completely empty and no reason for living. That's usually months, often 6, 12 months. The other thing about going through the family court is right back at the beginning, you don't get the initial assault finished. You're hit with repeated assaults all the time. And most people can cope with 1 or 2 assaults without too much problem. But by the time you've been hit 5, 10 times, you really are struggling. Eventually people will come out the other side, but you're talking at least 1 year to get to the other side, and often much longer. This is the Dr. Roberts simplified version of how your brain works. And what happens, you start with your thought in one area, it goes to the next nerve and the next one and the next one. You meet up with a block, and so you go back to the beginning and start again. And round the circle you go. And all of us do that. You're lying in bed with your thoughts going round and round, and you think, gee, I wish this would stop.
Called a treadmill.
Yeah. Now, each time your one nerve sends a message to the next nerve, you get a little bubble of chemical released. And these little bubbles down there, they get released across to the next nerve, and when the next nerve's got enough of those chemicals, it fires off to send a message. Now, as you go round faster and faster, you get 2 things happening. One is where you get too much of the neurotransmitter in the synapse, and that means the next nerve is always firing off when it shouldn't. The other problem is you run out of neurotransmitter to send for the next message. So you are simultaneously going too fast and too slow. And I see lots of people in exactly that situation. You have several things going on in your mind all the time. You've got your first set of thoughts. You've got part of your brain telling you how to work your hands and feet. You've got another part telling you to breathe and telling your heart to work. You've got another part thinking, gee, I've got to get a bottle of milk on the way home from wherever I am. And as well as that, you have a monitoring system sitting in on top saying, are these thoughts reasonable? What do I need to do next? Which one's most important? And as we speed up, one of the earliest things to go is actually that monitoring system. So you lose track of whether you're being reasonable and what you should be doing next and how to order your thoughts. Frequently I do use medication, and it can be very helpful. I tend to use 2 medications for people who are depressed. One medication to build up the neurotransmitter in that nerve so you can send your next message, and another medication to slow you down so you can, to slow down the next message going so you can get hold of your thoughts. Kiwis tend to be rather reluctant to have medication. I spent 9 months in Australia and they have quite a different attitude, and frequently I had people coming along saying, I'm feeling a bit low, give me a pill. Out of that, I ended up giving quite a few people medication that I'd never would have thought to give medication before. And actually, they did an awful lot better on it. So that was a learning experience for me. And in fact, who cares if you got medication? I mean, actually, I am still on medication. No? And who cares? You know? You have medication, it's like money in the bank for a rainy day. Now, when you're in this situation, how much wetter do you want it to get? Because it does make a difference. And you remember that graph of the men and women suicide over the last few years climbing? And then in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe, we'll just go back to that. Okay, this graph, you can see that in the last 3 or 4 years, the suicide rate is falling since about 2000 for men. And I went to a meeting just this week with a psychiatrist talking, and he reckons this is the effect of medication and people being prepared to accept a medication. And I think that's probably right, actually, because I don't think the stress is any less. I don't think the difficulties are any less. I think this is people agreeing to try something. Doesn't stop it completely, but it helps.
Would that allow the family court to wind up the stress levels to match?
Yeah, might do.
Have they got the brain?
If they need more money, they'll think of something.
Usually by the time somebody gets to the point where they're ready to come and see me, they're already in big trouble at work, you know, or have given up work altogether. The other thing that a doctor can do for you is, if you're not coping at work, we can arrange like sickness benefit. Now, sickness benefit is no way to live, but at least it's better than committing suicide.
So you won't get any money to help you with your kids.
Absolutely you won't. Yeah. So this is the definition of slavery, and it's where someone has no choice about being involved in work and their labour is forced. And I believe that the majority of people who are on child support are in fact in slavery. I don't see any other way of understanding that. And this is from the United Nations, that slavery is prohibited, and I don't know, one day we may be able to take a case to the International Court, but I don't think it'll be this week.
Really?
This is a deliberately fuzzy picture of how many of us see our actions. Here on the left is mum beating up the child, and here is dad on the right serving her a glass of wine while she does it. And I think that's an absolutely true analogy of what's happening for many children. Okay. give me a couple of minutes and you might see. So in this situation, virtually all men will consider quite a number of options, and I don't think I've talked to anybody who hasn't considered suicide. Another thing that gets thought of is murder. Fortunately, in this country, we are slow to injure somebody else, and I think that's why we do have a relatively low murder rate. I think other countries, murder is more common than here. Many people want to take some sort of action against the family court, and I've heard all sorts of thoughts that are terrorist-like. I know one guy who wanted to get a tank and drive it through the IRD door. I told him to let me know when it was happening so I could join him.
Take a photograph.
So there's a variety of endpoints, but virtually everybody ends up with less contact with their kids. Lots of people end up dead. Few people end up in prison. And virtually everybody that I've met has ended up with lower earning capacity. That doesn't seem to be appreciated by IRD. Alcohol and drugs, I think, I would say 70–80% of the people who are addicted, it's directly from these issues. If you take out the stupid kids' behaviour who become addicted through just looking for teenage kicks, if you take that out, I think 99–100% of addiction comes from family issues. So I want to talk about the effects on the children for a minute. I don't know any kids who didn't want mum and dad to be together. There are some kids who might say, well, I understand why they can't live together, but I'd still like them. So initially, they'll have an awareness that something isn't right. One parent will move out of the house, and nearly always that's dad. And often the kids won't see dad for at least months. A new man comes on the scene, and at best the kids will feel divided loyalty. And in some instances, the new partner might be actively violent to the children. Yes, a charge of sexual abuse against a parent will guarantee some abuse to the child, whether there has been any sexual abuse at all, and the children will suffer at least in terms of they lose the image of the parent, they lose their innocence, they have this filter of suspicion. They'll undergo interrogations by all sorts of agencies, and when they say no, nothing's happened, this will be seen as denial. They get an image of the parent as an enemy. One child's played against another. The child plays one parent against the other. The child can feel responsible for driving the family apart. The parents go into the legal system and lose hundreds, well, tens of thousands. The child loses their sense of stability. Even when the kids do get back to see dad, dad's terrified to touch them. And yes, the kid thinks that they're the source of the problem. And this one I actually think is the most important, that the kid gains some power over the parent, which effectively prevents them from being parented. This is Footrot Flats, and Putty, who's the little girl there, has come to Wild's place, and she's been playing noises of cars racing up and down outside Wild's bedroom window in the middle of the night. So he races out of bed and is out there in his underpants trying to deal with the situation, sees her sitting in the ditch with her ghetto blaster, and eventually ends up clearly beaten by the situation. He says, "And I don't forget that although you're a little kid, you know when you hold all the aces." And that's exactly the situation that parents who are accused of abuse find themselves in. This is a pretty old quote now, but I do believe New Zealand is the #1 underfathered nation in the world. Mind you, there's several others who come a very close second. I want to have this little roll call of some kids now. Of course, there's a lot more children than that, but all of those kids are dead. Their parents were separated, they were in their mother's home, and they ended up dead directly as a result of being in the mother's home. Family court won't allow us to know, but I'm picking that father was prevented from interfering or intervening on the children's behalf because he had a protection order against him. This little clip out of the Herald a couple of years ago. This guy committed a crime just so that he could go to prison, got to within a metre of the person who killed his daughter, and was about to take some physical action against him, but was prevented by a guard. He got out of prison and he says about this guy who killed his daughter, "I want him locked up for the rest of his life because I know what I'm capable of. It's not a threat or anything. It's just, this wasn't a car accident. He tortured her to death." That's that little girl there. Some other high-profile cases. You probably remember this guy, election night last time. Looking for lost love. Well, you can almost bet that it was about his kids. Here's one again from a year or so ago. This is a guy who did take his wife out and ended up in hospital. So let's talk about child abuse for a minute. Virtually every study, everywhere in the world, I'm not aware of any exception, although I'll show you something in a minute. The #1 child abuser is stepfather, or mother's partner, mother's boyfriend, call him what you want, but we all know who he is. Others do include dad, grandpa, mum, everyone, but no one even comes near to stepfather. And from that, we would have to say the most dangerous place for a child in this country is in their mother's home. Here's some more. This is a girl who murdered her baby. The inset there is the father, and he says, "Gee, I wish I'd had the chance to look after this kid instead of her." Here's another one. Killed a baby, got 12 years. And another one, this lady and her partner beat the baby up so severely that it nearly died. Didn't end up dying. They rolled him into, I think it was Middlemore Hospital, and he was rescued. 4 months old.
This is why protection orders are usually taken out against the father, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? This is the only study that I've ever been able to find on where kids end up dead. And this place in the States, I think it was about 97, they had 275 kids killed that year, 24 in mum's home to 1 in dad's home. Some kids don't end up dead, but virtually every child who has gone through a separation of the parents will end up worse off than if the parents had managed to stay together. There are some instances where the separation is not acrimonious and those kids don't end up too bad. However, lots of kids get messed up and will end up committing suicide themselves, get into petty crime, gang involvement. I personally believe that the major driver for the mongrel mob and the Black Power is exactly these issues, that their fathers are taken away from them and they don't get adequate parenting. And that is so obvious to me that I can't understand how government agencies can't see this. Living in a mother, this is again a study from the States, a little bit old now, but it's the only one that I've ever managed to find. Number 1 cause for teenage suicide is living in a mother-only home. And here's another study from the University of Buenos Aires that I just saw, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. Open communication with father was the best protection that kids had against becoming addicted to a variety of drugs. Open communication with mother wasn't even slightly protective, but open communication with father was. And that's was a much better prevention than any of their programs that they studied.
Does that link back to discipline and self-discipline?
Didn't actually say directly in that study, but it just said open communication with father was the best protection. So that's what.
Whilst I really support the ethos of where you're going, I think you've got to be very careful because one study may find it but another may refute it quite strongly. So that doesn't dismantle the fact that children need parented by both parents, and I totally support where you're coming from. But it's quite scary bring those up. You know, I really am concerned.
I disagree. I think the time for academia is afterwards, not now. We need to get on.
Yeah, I can send you a copy of the study. I'm happy to do that.
But I think that the issue is shocking, and we should be shocked.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I want to give you a hypothetical case of 2 couples who both separate. One where the father is violent and abusive to the children, and mum finally gets sick of that and leaves with the kids. Another case where mum decides she has developed differently and wants her own life and takes off, but doesn't want the interference of dad, so gets a protection order against him. So both cases end up with a protection order against them.
don't forget that new life is funded from collateral from dad.
Oh, sure. So now the 2 couples recombine differently, and Jack gets together with Sally, and Jill gets together with Sam. Jack and Jill's kids are probably better off. However, although Jack is prevented from seeing his own children, there is nothing at all to prevent him from seeing Sally's children and beating them. If Sam tries to protect his kids, that'll be seen as breaking his protection order and he's likely to be imprisoned. I believe that scenario is exactly the case that Coral Burrows found herself in. So this is again a cartoon, Dilbert, where this woman blackmails her work colleague into doing some work for her. She produces a photo and he says, "I'll say I was only scratching an itch." And she says, "Oh well, good luck with that." And that actually I think is normal in the kind of relationships we're seeing here. And he goes to his boss to tell him about this and gets the expected response from the boss of no support at all, if anything, criticism or even being laughed at. This is a new study. Yes, this is one of the things we're up against is misinformation. And this is a study from Canada with who assaults victims, and this is from 2003. Now, they've said here the person who assaults children is father, mother, and other family. And you'll see the dark blue showing father as the major abuser of children. However, in very fine print underneath that graph, they said the term father includes biological father, stepfather, adoptive father, and mother's boyfriend, which is actually deliberate misinterpretation of the figures. Here's another thing we're up against. Judge Boshier says, we're not biased, and here's the figures to prove it. 63% with mum and 18.4% with dad, and that isn't biased.
No, hang on, that's not quite correct. Can I just explain those figures a little bit better?
Yep, you go right ahead.
Where they go to a defended hearing, that figure is 18.4%. So at that defended hearing, even if you've got reason to go to a defended hearing, you still have less than 1 in 5 chance of getting your children full time. That's what that one is about. This is an undefended hearing where there is some kind of consent or some kind of bullshit consent, and that is 11.1. Now, if you look at grandparents, where is the grandparents on here? No, grandparents is not on here, but grandparents actually get 12% of full custody of the children. So the grandparents actually get more than the total full custody that fathers get. So I think that Boshier, you're quite right, Boshier, that is extremely deceptive. And they say that this is consent. No, this is not consent. This is the lawyer telling you that you will get every other weekend and half the holidays. So we'll go for that, eh? And we'll go for a mediation and we'll sign that consent, memorandum of consent, and then we'll get it changed into a consent order. And you think that's all you can do?
Like Patterson and suspended sentence.
That's a bit misleading, Jim, to the extent that fathers who are in defended hearings are there because they have no choice but to go to the defended hearing. Grandparents are very often in a situation where they're volunteering to take over from parents who have either run away, not capable, or have given a child to grandparents and they want to secure custody. So that 12% is often a voluntary hearing simply to secure custody rather than actually entering a defended hearing for a battle.
That's true, but also the defended hearings are the father also saying, I haven't got any chance of not getting the kids because of what she's done and what she's done to the kids. And then they go into a defended hearing, or, as you say, it could be because they've been accused of abuse, and they go into a defended hearing, but still they get less than 1 in 5 chances. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's all right. Yes, my point about those is Boschia calls this unbiased. Just,
Don't ever forget that Bosch is the most skilled spin doctor in New Zealand.
sure.
Better than Mahari.
So, yes, that's about my talk, and that's who I am, and please get in touch with me, drvivrob@hotmail. Damn, I had another cartoon to show you, but I don't know where it's gone.
There's probably 1 or 2 people with questions on it, and I'd like to throw a couple at you too, just to get your professional response to some of these issues.
Might need no paper.
All right, I'll just hold it for a moment then. So, comments. Yeah. Murray, is this going to be available on your website?
Sorry, the DVD, no, even will organise distribution.
Okay, so just talk
You
to Murray.
realise that Viv's already done that on this, and it's been
Yeah.
available for some time.
Yeah, there-
Your emails, you'd know.
There is a similar presentation on the system at Noel's website, which I just can't remember. Noel Papillon, I think it is. Ken.
Doctor, I'd like to say thank you very much. I've got to scoot off. But just a couple of quick thoughts. One is the disturbing thing about the men's group for me, and I stopped going to the meetings over in Northcote, was I went there to tell my story and to listen to other people's story, and I hoped they would positively charge me, but it almost had the negative effect for me, in that I suddenly thought, shit, I'm not the only one. And I ended up getting a little bit more, feeling of despair that it's happening to everybody and so on and so forth. There hasn't been a single bit of information that you presented today that I can't relate to or agree with. In terms of suicide, the thoughts of it, in terms of, hey, if I win lotto, let's take out a contract on the X and blah, 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 And so what I'm trying to drive at is, on the one hand, it's great, it's absolutely brilliant that somebody such as yourself has this material and is starting to know all this stuff and it's starting to get communicated. That's absolutely brilliant. Because all too often I felt like I'm the only one that goes through it. But then when I do open my mouth, I hear worse stories than myself. So it almost drives me to not tell my bloody story because somebody else has got it worse.
Did I answer?
And
Go right ahead.
And just quickly, in terms of medication, I'm not into taking medication. I'm reluctant to stick my hand up and say I'm depressed. But I feel absolutely boxed in, and the definition of the word slavery at the moment is, and I've seen it for myself for the last couple of months, is, I'm on a treadmill, going nowhere. I've had no hope at all in owning a home anymore in my lifetime because of the debt that's constantly building up and everything else. And, am I depressed? If I talk to you long enough, you'd write out a note that says, yes, he is depressed.
Absolutely.
But I'm not about to give that to anybody. And part of when I went to an administration review with the Inland Revenue, and I tried to tell this to them that I have all these set of circumstances and this is how I feel and I am depressed and blah, blah, blah. Why don't you get a medical certificate? Oh, yeah. I'm bound to get a medical certificate because the minute I produce a medical certificate that says I'm depressed and I'm suffering all of this, guess who gets to use it against me? The ex gets to use it against me as an excuse as to why I'm not a fit father and I can't get access to my children.
Can I interrupt you? It's really important that I do interrupt you because I hear exactly what you say and I hear what others say. And I mean, there's just straight out proof here that there are the public response to say that they agree with what's being told. And the information is very clear. So the demand is that people like yourself focus, absolutely focus on the justification and get quickly into is that Project Reunion is going to be the means for this to occur, then that's what needs to happen. But what we haven't had is we haven't had the people showing boards to make the change. And we've got everything on our side, and we go up against the administration, and we all win out one way or another. We take our wages, and we sit down, we have our beer, and we go slow. And we're not allowed to do that anymore. So it's a matter of taking your energy, your passion, putting it into a place where it can be expanded and utilising it. And Project Reunion, if that's what it's going to be, then that's what it should be. We should all follow it.
Yeah, and I acknowledge that, and I do want to be a part of it. But my first criteria at the moment is for me to just get on and be there for my children and fight the system as I can, as I am, but just to be alive for my children is my bottom line, and to keep feeding my children in terms of contact, of the little contact I get, and keeping those, you know, that sort of involvement going. As
Yeah,
much
bro,
as I
but
can.
you're just going to go around in the same circle. You're just going to meet the same circle.
Can I just mention, you know, if using depression against you and with the court, who do you think's worse off? The person who has diabetes and is doing something about it, or the person who has diabetes and isn't doing something about it? Because it would be astounding to me for any guy to go through this and not be depressed, and to say and to clearly show depression and burnout, if you want that as a term, to clearly show the signs of that and deny it. Maybe that's worse than actually saying it and having medication.
I'm not advertising it. 'Cause
Yeah, but
in family court, it'll get used against me.
yeah, just like if you had diabetes, that might get used against you, but it would be a much stronger case against you to have diabetes and be knowing nothing about it.
The other thing I wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to come and do half a presentation at my next family court hearing. Where are those things?
Yeah. Well, we have a team of perhaps 5 or 6 guys who would be happy to do Mackenzie Friend for you. It's no trouble.
Keep in touch.
Absolutely. Sure. I'm Viv Roberts, and drvivrob at hotmail.com is my address. That's the best way to get hold of me. Or you can give me a ring on 06 870 4875, which is my home.
Viv's contact details have been in the coalition book for probably 4 or 5 months. So the information's there. Google.
There it is.
Another
Okay.
issue that we want to tackle later on with is the way that women's mental health is dealt with, and how doctors deal with that issue, and how much that impacts on our family court situation and our father's situation. But is there any comment that you make as a doctor how you feel the way that you may be forced to treat the situation, or you're legally bound to treat the situation, that if you could change something, would improve our situation? Are we treating women, when you see women coming into your surgery and they're dealing with mental health issues, is there any way that you could improve their treatment that would stop that impact on the situation that we're talking about here today? I feel a lot of the family court cases that end up with defended hearings are because the family court's protecting a mother who has mental health issues that aren't being dealt with.
Yeah. I don't think there is a simple answer to that.
You don't want to go.
Yeah. I think women tend to be more likely to come and see us, and are more likely to accept medication, counselling. They also tend to be better organised than men. I mean, I do have a whole section of presentation on female aggression, but I don't think we've got time for that.
Getting back to what Kate said with regard to depression and how it would be used against them in the court. If a mother goes into court in a depressed state, that is used as a bonus. The same argument should be turned around that the depression that the gentleman is suffering is a direct result of this biased family court, and should also be a flag for him. That message needs to get back through to the family court. If a guy is going in there in a depressed state, it is because of this family court.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the presumption throughout the legal system is men are bad and women, if they've got a problem, are mad. Men are bad, women are mad.
But even mad women can
Yeah.
parent kids.
That's right. Because a mad woman's better than a bad man. Sure. But that's the presumption.
I actually, as a woman here, who everything that you have put up there, I have experienced. So while you're a man sitting here, I have suffered the loss of my children, the lies. I have been called a violent mother. I have actually stood, and when I tried, I thought truth bore out in any court situation. I had to actually walk away with deep depression, and I never told the court that, how deeply depressed I was. And so everything you see up there, as a woman, I have actually experienced.
Sure.
And it's really unfair and sad. Now, all I'd like to say here is that I do believe, and please hear me out here, is I think men for years and years and years have been badly treated in the family court. I would be the first to stand up and say that. I believe the reason why is to do with the fact that New Zealand women for many years have had a lower education, have been the primary caregiver, etc., and their demographics show they haven't got an income. So the male as the primary earner ends up being discriminated against. As that goes on, because I'm a high income earner and so is my ex-husband, I'm treated no different than you. It's about the system. Of course you have been absolutely demeaned, but it's not about, like, there's no doubt that there's terribly, terribly, awfully aggressive and vexatious women that have made your lives miserable. I have the same in a male who probably doesn't lie straight in his bed, and I'm tired and sick of all the affidavits with the litany of lies. It's very
No,
sad
I need to answer.
situation.
I need to answer that on the basis of statistics, on the basis of 100 times in the family court as experience. Of course, I have been in for some women, Grace, and quite a few other ones. What I'm saying is, statistically speaking, 92% of the initial applicants in the family court are women. Now, whether that states that they're undereducated, I disagree, because if you decide, if you know what your rights are, you go to a smart solicitor, that pushes your IQ up about 4 or 5 points on a 1 to 10 scale. Wait a minute, just let me finish. And therefore, those adversarial and vexatious solicitors know what they can get out of the family court. We know one lawyer that constantly represents women and constantly makes the allegation that there's sexual molestation of the children. And this is her living. This is her living. And if you've got somebody smart on your side, doesn't matter whether you're undereducated or not, look at the proportion of women that are here today compared to the proportion of men that are here today. Now, I sympathise with your position because I know what you've been through. You have explained to me what you've been through, and it is just as bad. I can understand that. So don't get us wrong that we're just picking on women. What we're saying is that there is an issue, there is a big issue that exists here in relation to children. Let's talk about the children for once. The children are the ones who are copying it. 92% of the applicants to the family court are mothers or women, and they are trashing the lives of their children to some extent, because they're saying, we can't get over this, we've got to move on to an adversarial situation, and that is what we're trying to combat, exactly what you've been through.
Well, I would agree that there's cases, they're a minority, but there's cases where the genders are reversed.
Absolutely.
And the same thing happens, and the family court says, see, we're not being biased.
Okay, well, let's take your... Hang on, let's take your case. It won't take long, Devon. Let's take your case. When I was sitting next to you as a Mackenzie friend, and you said, Judge Mather said to you, Mr. Crosby, how long do you think your side of the case will take? And you said, and it was a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I don't know, Your Honour. It depends how many excuses that Your Honour or my ex can think up for me not seeing my child. It could take 5 days.
Well,
And Dave, that is a pearl. That is an absolute pearl. And probably this is exactly the same position that you're in. But he's got a smarter lawyer, maybe, than you did.
Linda, can I also say that I think in answer to the gender issue, that there is a difference between men and women, and I congratulate you for being in this room at this time, because we are here because we have decided to stand up against the system, and that's why we're punished. As soon as we decide to protect our children in such a way, we become punished because the system cannot handle it. And so it's
how about we get the chivalry over
what
and
about
done
some of these
with
guys
and
that
ask
come
Linda to
along
stop
with the
defending
stuff
Professor Orr. She
already
doesn't need
prepared,
to
you know,
do
and taking a
that.
long
We've listened
time.
and supported as best we can.
There's Ed over there, and there's this guy over here, and
Get
there's
the
that guy over there.
chivalry
There's
over
at least 3 more.
To the value of Viv's presentation, I'd just like to say that I've read a lot of the research about the gender differences and the impact on children. There is a lot of, they've put up some really good statements here, but all I can say to you is be really careful about taking those literally. You've got to look at the background of that research and how that research was set up. If you take it literally, you will just add to your anger.
I just know what I feel.
Thanks for your time today, Viv, and thanks for making yourself available on email to and phone to people here.